Monsters.
Monsters. Stupid.
Gentlemen, let's broaden our minds.
Are they in the proper approach pattern for today?
Negative.
All the weapons! Now! Charge the lightning field.
Honey, it's family hour. There must be something on.
Oh, wow! Candy critters!
Oh!
Oh, great.
Dispatch Ajax.
Our favorite show.
It's starting.
Say something.
Well, okay, yes.
Fucker.
But yes, welcome back to Dispatch Ajax, the podcast where we explain geeky things for you. Sha-na-na-na. So stupid. Hey,
God.
he's Jake and I'm stupid. How about that?
Yep. I can see him. Can you? Today we're talking about monsters. Ooh.
Yeah, we're going to go back in time to some obscure TV shows. And this will probably be a series because we want to get to a lot of these, for instance, Night Gallery or something I learned about today called Perversions of Science, which I really want to see now.
You have my interest piqued.
Exactly.
Courtney Cox is also in Perversions of Science, but it's spelled differently.
I really hope so. Oh, okay, I get it. That was good. It took me a second. That was
Well, it'll take a second to get there.
But we're talking about certain TV shows that are extremely geeky, that are extremely nostalgic for a lot of people, but most people do not remember because they were low budget, A, syndicated, B, and, quite frankly, not that great for the most part.
Yeah.
So this time we are talking about, Jake, what is it?
Monsters.
Not the Gareth Edwards Monsters, which is a great movie.
Yeah, or if you just Google Monsters TV show, the plethora of those things that comes up.
Monsters Inside Me.
Which is, that's a freaky show. I can't watch more than like an episode of that. You just feel the creepy crawlies like under your skin. Monsters was a TV show.
Monsters was a TV show.
It was a TV show, so it was a...
TV show?
No, it wasn't that.
It was a fever dream.
Wow,
Yeah, this is the stuff I have to edit out.
Yeah, I'm sorry. My brain literally just like shut off just now.
I know! We have this problem a lot, and it takes a lot of editing.
I am really sorry.
Don't be sorry, I do the same thing.
Yeah, so Monsters was a syndicated horror anthology that ran from 1988 to 1991. The basic idea was that it was a bit of a horror thing, but not totally horror.
Yeah.
It's
kind of a Night Gallery thing.
Night Gallery, kind of Goosebumpsian.
Which, I mean...
There were some adult stories in there, but a lot of it was kind of softened for a younger audience.
It was syndicated. Back in the day, you had TV shows that were produced by networks, but then you also had TV shows that were produced independently that were picked up by networks.
So Monsters was produced and picked up by the Tribune Entertainment, based out of Chicago. The Tribune network system, which kind of makes up like WGN and other things, they hit 130 cities. I don't remember what happened to Tribune Entertainment.
Doesn't matter. You get the idea. In the network TV show system, you got essentially per season 13 episodes, 22 episodes, or 26 episodes, depending on how confident they were in what you were doing. And that came about after Desilu, after Star Trek, because Star Trek had 30 plus episodes a season, they pared it down so that they wouldn't have to be committed to so much stuff. So if you had a show that got picked up by a network, they would produce it for these very specific number of episodes. And if it was bad, and they knew it might be bad, you'd get like maybe 6 as a leash, and then they would pull it if it got no ratings. But you always signed a contract for either 13, 22, or 26 episodes.
Yeah. Or 24, as it was with Monsters. Yeah, I think it's probably a little looser than that. It's probably became a little more case-by-case basis, but it is general that there were like...
It never went outside of those numbers, though. It was never like, oh, I got 17 episodes. That
weird.
Never happened.
I was literally thinking of 17 to say.
Wait. Are you thinking about the number 23?
I was thinking about Jim Carrey. Does that count? It was syndicated. It hit 130 cities, which makes about 90% of the market at the time. That's another thing we'll talk about with syndication in different markets. So a TBS or TNT was the southern market, and a WGN and Tribune Entertainment was the northern, Midwest, etc., etc. Mm-hmm. Doesn't really matter. The whole idea of this particular show was a monster of the week. Literally months. So one of the things that differentiated this is that Twilight Zone or Night Gallery or Tales from the Dark Side, which plays into this, those were just science fiction, fantasy, horror. You could do anything. But Monsters essentially had to have a, quote, monster in every single episode. So this all comes out of the mind of Richard P. Rubenstein. He was the showrunner and executive producer. So this guy, he done Dawn of the Dead, Creepshow 2, Day of the Dead, Pet Sematary. He did Tales from the Dark Side, so he was the exec producer of all 90 episodes of that show.
Which I actually liked when I saw it as a kid, but it's basically on par quality-wise with with Monsters if you really look at it now.
Yeah, there's a lot of, we'll call it fodder.
Yeah.
But right after Tales from the Dark Side ended, Monsters began. Flowed right into it. And again, Monsters was a little more dumbed down isn't the right word, but
for mainstream audiences?
Mainstream, I would say maybe designed for younger audiences. I would say it's more akin to Erie, Indiana than it is Tales from the Crypt.
Ooh, okay. That's interesting. Erie, Indiana is way more for kids than Monsters is.
It is, but I'm saying on the scale there.
Yeah, it is closer. You're right.
Rubenstein said, a good monster is a mixture of both fun and scare. At the time, we were trying to differentiate what we were doing from the Friday the 13th and the Nightmare on Elm Street kinds of series. We're dealing with fantasy as opposed to realism. There are no psychotic killers running around, killing 16-year-old camp counselors on our show. We are kind of like a Brothers Grimm fairy tale school, or the school of things that go bump in the night, rather than like a slice and dice.
Which is ironic.
It is. I think it's probably more the idea, the Disney-fication of Brothers Grimm stories.
Well, I mean, no, the Disney-fication of Brothers Grimm stories is Disney.
Well, that's what I'm saying. He had been working with those, and so he wanted to do a lighthearted isn't the right way, but another step towards that. And he wanted to focus on Dick Smith.
If I ever have an affair and I'm checking into a cheap motel, that's the name I'm going to use.
Sir, we've already had Dick Smith.
Dick Smith has been here for a half an hour. I don't know what you're talking about.
Dick Smith has always been here.
I'm a Dick Smith.
But Dick Smith he's one of the preeminent makeup artists in Hollywood. The makeup work on The Godfather, The Exorcist, Taxi Driver, The Sentinel, Altered States, Scanners, The Hunger, Amadeus, Starman, Poltergeist. In the credits, you see special effects overseen by Dick Smith. This was one of the things that Rubenstein wanted to focus on. He wanted special effects driven prosthetics in every episode. Mm-hmm. And so that was the idea. He worked on that alongside some of his other projects up until, like I said, it ended in 91. He went on to The Stand and The Langoliers and Thinner and Night Flyer.
Oh, man. So much bad Stephen King.
Yeah. I think he found an avenue to go in to produce these things.
Sure.
But then, this is personally mostly for me, he was the executive producer on the sci-fi miniseries Dune and Children of Dune. And he was an executive producer on Denis Villeneuve's Dune.
Really?
Yeah. Dune Part 2 coming out.
Wow.
Yeah. That's by far his biggest thing post
No shit.
I don't know, Pet
He
Cemetery.
did monsters and then that. I mean, come on.
But it's funny. Also, his first producing thing was a TV movie called O.J. Simpson: Juice on the Loose.
Oh yes,
from 1974.
Sign me up. I assumed it was in the White Bronco.
Oh no, this is all about his sports career. If only he had another TV movie, O.J. Simpson killing it, or
Juice Newton, Juice on the Loose.
O.J. Simpson, a stab in Hollywood. So Monsters, like I said, had the consultant of Dick Smith. He was overseeing this, and then he would bring in new talent, break on the scene to work with them under his supervision. And by network standards, they were a pretty cheap show. So each of their episodes was about $200,000 to make, as opposed to $350,000 to $400,000 for a network half hour at the time. To make this a little more suitable money-wise, they would often let special effects people do the special effects, but also direct at the same time, kind of like cut costs.
Like Phil Tippett finally got to do.
Yeah, I mean, that took him decades. You bring up-and-coming guys, I'll work for peanuts as long as I get to direct and show my work.
Right.
The series came about because they were proud of the makeup and special effects they were doing. They weren't trying to do anything too flashy, but they wanted to do a monster every week with a good story and a twist. They wanted to relate more of a classic perspective than shows aimed at younger audiences, giving people a scare in a fun way. They wanted to not do like psychotic killers, or those type of creepy things, but wanted that old style monster on the screen, big in life, coming to get people kind of thing. They said that the ratings were pretty good for the first season, and I think they did well. I think most of their best work probably came in their third and final season, but nothing lasts forever, and they did eventually move on as a studio from Monsters, ending it, like I said, with, didn't I just say how many episodes there were? Well, with a number of episodes.
It was a certain number of episodes.
Yeah, 72. Yeah.
Wow, I was going to say
well,
that, but
24,
I was like,
24 times 3, that'll do it.
Well, yeah, that's true.
Yeah.
Math!
I don't do it. I don't believe in it. It's like magnets.
Doesn't exist.
Not to me, it doesn't. And so that was the whole idea. You'd have these, pseudo-mystery twists, morality plays, but with a monster at the center of it, or at least at the end of it, every episode. And those monsters ran the gamut. Full-on gleep-glop monster things to low-level, a little bit of prosthetic, quote-unquote monster.
And sometimes they were like really interesting and innovative, and then sometimes they were just like, wow, what did we have lying around? Kind of monsters.
Yeah, honestly, it like the episodes, the special effects work kind of ran the gamut. As with the quality, some stuff would be like, oh wow, this is really on point, both with the look of the show, with the story, and with like the special effects work they did, and some of like, wow, this is like a after school special with like the high school theater department like made a monster out of paper mache.
where you're like, oh, Goosebumps did have a big budget.
Yeah.
A prime example in it, though I don't want to get into necessarily some of those details yet, but one of the things that struck me earlier, I watched the episode Bed and Boar with Steve Buscemi.
Yeah.
And the weird thing, I mean, there are a lot of weird things about that episode, but the one thing that struck me right off the bat was that it's supposed to be a shitty motel, right, that he's staying in. And yet, because it's very obviously a soundstage and a set, there's no ceiling. It feels like they want to make it seem like a small, crappy hotel, and yet the ceilings seem like 25 foot tall because it's a soundstage. There's no actual like ceiling to it. So if you watch the episode, they're like, "What are you complaining about? This is a spacious, amazing room. What is the problem here?"
Yeah, and
but
we're never gonna show
you can
that
tell
other
that it's
wall
like
either.
No, you're right. You mean the fourth one? Yeah, they never really do that.
Yeah, I mean, honestly, it was a show of wide
little
variety.
means.
Yeah, little means. But at least with me, there are episodes and moments that stuck with me. One of those being the opening, which you would have heard at the beginning of this episode. They try to set the whole thing as an engaging...
Well, they're trying to set a tone. We're going to do something grotesque, but it's also not going to be too scary for the family. But also a little edgy.
Slightly edgy, but also slightly cartoony and maybe a little campy, maybe a little like okay for the younger audience. It starts out with a family. The mother is bringing in a cart, 50s style, and then it pans up and you see her face and she's like Cyclops with like little horns on there.
She's dressed like a 50s housewife.
Yes. And there's a little girl who also is a Cyclops with little horns, and she's excited to eat the creepy crawlies or, candied crawlies that they have.
The implication is that the father's trying to look up something to watch, and he's looking in, for some reason, the newspaper to do so.
Well, I mean, this is supposed to be the old times.
In a time before TV Guide.
Oh, TV Guide, how we miss you. Oh, Monsters, our favorite show. Everyone sits down as a family to watch, and they turn off the lights, and you see the father, and he's like a big potato kind of looking guy.
Yeah, it's that classic terrible sitcom archetype of the schlubby husband and the hot wife.
Yeah.
That exists even today in sitcoms.
I don't really understand what's going on there. But then they settle in, and they're like, oh, they're going to watch the show along with us.
So he turns off the lamp, so they zoom into the dad, who's wearing glasses. And in some of the Chef's Kiss special effects, they use the actual logo for the show, reversed, superimposed over each of his glass lenses, and then it zooms into his face. They spin out and merge into the title card, Monsters.
With a big over it. Because monsters love to laugh.
You know what? If anything, love, laugh, terrorize. That's the Monsters credo.
Yeah.
It's a cross stitch on the wall, for sure. Love, laugh,
terrorize.
Anyway.
To prepare for this, we decided to revisit some episodes, some flavors of what is considered good and what was considered bad. I mean, we couldn't watch all 70-some episodes, right? So,
even though I'm sure we have at some point.
There's at least a couple that we remembered that we wanted to touch on. So I think we're going to cover a few of those. The first one let's talk about is from February 4th, 1989, the 13th episode of the first season, Glim Glim.
Oh, boy. Oh, boy.
Yeah.
I watched it twice, because the first time I kind of blanked out and wasn't paying attention after a while, even though it's only like 22 minutes
That
long.
is totally understandable.
Yeah.
If there are interesting actors, who went on to do something, I will mention them. The
Sure.
director of this particular episode was Peter Stein. You might know him from his DP work on Chud, or Ernest Saves Christmas, Pet Sematary, Brenda Starr, which will come up in the near future.
Wow, I forgot that was a movie.
Necessary Roughness,
Scott Bakula.
Mr. Nanny,
Oh.
Mr. Hogan himself.
Mhm.
And it was written by F. Paul Wilson, who didn't do a whole lot. This is pretty much his only writing credit.
Oh, wow.
Other than he wrote the book that the movie The Keep is based off of.
Wow, really?
Yeah, I know.
That's specific.
It really is.
What a weird... Okay. Because that's a very niche B-movie as well.
Yeah, if you guys haven't seen The Keep, I think it's on Shudder now, maybe, but it's a really interesting Michael Mann film.
Yeah, weird, huh?
From the early 80s with Gabriel Byrne and Ian McKellen, and the Nazis are dealing with a Jewish demon.
One of the very few Jewish horror movies.
Yeah.
There's like that, Golem, and then The Vigil. Those are like the only straight up Jewish horror movies.
Have you seen The Vigil?
Yes, I have.
Is it worth seeing?
For the purposes of talking about Jewish horror movies, yes.
All right. Well,
I'm not saying it's a bad movie.
I thought the trailer looked good, and I just never got to it, so...
It is very atmospheric. It's definitely not a bad movie. I'm just going to say it's a slow burn.
Okay. The idea of Glim Glim is that you have the few remaining survivors, which is father, daughter, and some guy they ran into, and they sneak into this library because they are the final survivors in this town, as an alien has invaded the town and somehow killed everyone in the town. There is a bubble that is surrounding the town and keeping the outside world out.
Though I don't think they know that it's an alien, right?
No, they know it's an alien. They saw the spaceship come down.
Oh, that's right. No, you're
Now,
right.
the whole time they can hear this alien speaking, because the alien is residing in the library, I guess, to consume information about the human species.
Right. Like Johnny Five.
He is alive, but not for long. So Glim Glim, the alien, he is trying to figure out what's going on. You hear him like speaking to his recording crystal, talking about how he came down, whoopsie daisy, bacteria inside of my gut has spread out. It is lethal to all humans. There happen to be a few who are surviving. I don't really know how they're surviving, so I'm going to try and make contact with them because the outside world will break through the shield that is holding them out soon enough because my batteries are running low. Apparently he didn't plug in before he left for Earth.
Should have thought about that,
Should have
man.
thought it.
You got to stop by that truck stop and get that overpriced charger.
But once the barrier comes down, he knows that this virus will spread throughout the world and kill all of humanity.
Everyone. It's important to remember this alien is not malevolent. He is just an explorer who's trying to make contact.
Right. And we should also explain what this alien looks like. Okay, so he's a Play-Doh green version of Grimace.
Oh, I was literally going to say that. Wow. But without a mouth.
Without a mouth. He does have eyes, and he's got 2 arms, kind of, and hands.
Doesn't he have more than that? It seems like he's got a lot of protrusions.
Yeah,
It seems like it's hard to pin down.
Yeah, again, he's very like Moonanite in a way.
Yes, he does.
He's got a lot of spiky bits.
Not Moonanite, but the other ones.
The anti-Moonanite people in those episodes. And when we say Moonanite, and you guys know what we're talking about, then you guys get it.
You get it.
But he's like, apparently he's speaking so fast that he can't figure out a way to slow himself down.
And they actually mentioned that. He makes that a plot point. That's a weird, interesting touch because it's not that the person he comes in contact with doesn't understand the language he's speaking. It's that he's speaking too quickly, which is odd, but they do manage to make that work because of how they end up communicating later.
Right. So she eventually sneaks out to go upstairs where the alien is and then interacts with them. Mm-hmm. You find out that he is okay-ish. He doesn't seem to be malevolent. He wants to try and figure out a way to communicate with them and extract some of their blood so he can work on an antibacterial that will...
Which we don't really find out until, like, the end of the episode. But
yeah, there's honestly so little to this episode.
Yeah, it does feel like it's 7 minutes long.
It really does. It's more of the thought of an episode rather than...
It's like a TikTok video version of an episode.
It really is. In fact, if you just condense this whole episode down into a TikTok, it might be better.
Yeah, it might be more tolerable.
You also have some pretty rough acting from everybody involved.
Oof. Yeah. Especially at the beginning when those 2 dudes are talking. She doesn't know her mother's dead.
Yeah.
He's like, well, and he grabs the other dude. Well, my dad's dead. My dad was a piece of shit, and he's dead just like her mom, so she's going to have to deal with it. And I'm like, What are you talking about?
Everybody we know's dead, so I'm going to kill this alien.
You know what? Joan of Arc is dead.
They're just trying to kind of shove in some drama, I guess. Quickly, or give them a reason that they find guns and take them upstairs at the end of the episode. Because what happens is the little girl's communicating, they have the alphabet, he's pointing out letters to spell words.
Because for some reason he does understand English. That's what I'm saying. They set that up earlier. Yeah, he's not speaking a different language. He's just speaking too quickly, and he can't figure out how to slow down.
And I guess he can't figure out how to write anything down. He's not, well, until the end.
He's got 2 fingers.
Yeah, they're kind of like an elephant's trunk for fingers.
Kind of. Yeah.
I mean, it's not the best.
It seems like a lot of his protrusions have like 2 little flagella things on them, but one's bigger and then points to letters on an elementary school alphabet learning booklet for the little girl, who's his only friend.
Well, she's the only person living other than these other 2.
Well, and who believes him.
Right. She's not scared of him. She's like, oh, you're fine, blah, blah, blah.
Yeah, we've got a Mac and Me E.T. thing going on, Munchie thing going on.
Yeah, ooh, Munchie. Woof. So, long story short, he's trying to get her blood. She's like, okay. Hey, can you get those other guys' blood too? She's like, it sounds like a tough ask, but I'll see if I can do it. And so he writes down a simple sign of need blood or something of the sort. I don't remember exactly.
See, I read that a little differently. She's like, what do you need? And he spells out blood, and she really thinks about it for a second. I thought that was going to turn into a weird horror thing.
Yeah, like drain her.
Right. Is he going to sacrifice her? The way I read it was that he was going to use her blood to synthesize the antidote, but it was going to take her talking the other two into accepting the antidote.
Oh, see, it was my understanding that I think they all three of them, they happen to be immune, which is why they're alive.
Interesting.
And so he was going to need all three of their blood to make sure the same element is in all of them.
Okay.
Honestly, it doesn't matter because we never get that far.
No, it doesn't really matter.
So as he's taking her blood and a very MST3K kind of bobble thing that goes on her.
It is pretty funny.
It is. The other two figured, oh, where's the little girl? And
Is that her dad?
yeah, it's supposed to be her dad.
He's like, oh, Amy, or whatever her name is. Oh, where are you? And he gets up and crawls through a vent and ends up finding Glim Glim and his daughter through a grate.
Yeah.
Rather stylish metal grate, actually. And then he's like, what? And it startles Glim Glim, who then drops the, quote, vial of blood, which seems like a fucking tanker.
Yeah.
Like a fucking big gulp of blood. It's huge.
Yeah, it's pretty big. Okay, so then the girl disappears. This is the part of the episode I truly didn't get, but we'll get to it.
Oh.
No.
This is the twist, though.
Well, I know, but let me go through this.
Sure. Yeah.
So she disappears as Glim Glim is confronted by the two guys. He's not speaking English slow enough for them to understand, so they open fire. They plug this alien. He drops like a bag of hammers. Then the girl is like, hey, what's going on? She had gone in the other room, I guess barely heard the gunshots. She had been messing with the Christmas tree.
No, she was making a sign that said Merry Christmas.
He made the sign. Glim
you're
wrote
right.
the sign because he had figured out that it's Christmas time and he wanted to make them feel welcome. So he created a Christmas tree and then she was looking at it. And then she's like, what happened to Glim Glim? You didn't hurt him, did you?
Please tell me you didn't hurt
Yeah,
him.
as Glim Glim is bleeding out on the floor.
Go.
Yeah. And then it pans over and you see Glim Glim's sign he was holding that said Merry Christmas. You know, it's lame. But she had the thing on. She gets startled. The bauble drops, smashes. Instead of interacting with the people or the reason that they got startled, she goes to look at the Christmas tree just to set up this little bit at the end, the twist.
Yeah.
It's real dumb.
They could have set up the whole Christmas thing earlier, but they didn't really.
Well, they did. You hear the Christmas theme.
Yes.
It's playing over the opening credits. It's just started snowing.
She drops the thing and she says Rosebud, and then we totally get it.
Glim Glim was actually the Grinch. His protrusion grew 3 sizes that day.
This, sadly, was one of the more complex narratives of this show. There's not a lot going on here, and the reveals and the twists are pretty obvious. Like, if you've ever seen a single Twilight Zone episode, you could pretty much tell you what's going on right off the bat.
Yeah. But again, this would be something for an 8-year-old.
Sure.
Alien wasn't bad at all. We were the monsters.
We were the monsters. You just summed up 90% of that show.
It's true, but that's the whole idea. You have these monsters at the opening watching a show called Monsters, but the idea is that here are the quote, monsters interacting with the real monsters, which is humanity.
Yeah, which is actually pretty decent commentary.
Yeah.
It's just super low budget.
Yeah. It's trying to punch above its weight sometimes, but rarely can it really land a blow.
Oh, yeah. It's got so many limitations. Not including actors, because a lot of times it has people that end up being really great actors later, or at least famous actors.
Like the next episode, Bed and Boar.
Oh my god.
That one was from January 21st, 1990. It's the 14th episode of the second season.
Oof.
So this one was directed by Sarah Driver. Didn't do a whole lot, but is credited as idea inspired by for the movie Broken Flowers.
What? The Jim Jarmusch movie?
Yeah.
Wow.
Oh no.
It's like in Garth Marenghi. Theme song inspired by a tune whistled by Garth Marenghi.
Yeah. It's also written by David Odell, who wrote The Dark Crystal and Supergirl and Masters of the Universe.
Yeah, you're right. One of those is cool.
But this one does star Steve Buscemi.
I'm willing to bet this is around the time of Steve Buscemi in a really geeky movie that is very rarely seen called Ed and His Dead Mother. It almost feels like a Peter Jackson type film. And in the ending credits, They Might Be Giants have a song in it.
Really?
It's weird, but I mean, considering the budget.
So Ed and His Dead Mother is from 1993. At this point, he'd already done Reservoir Dogs.
Oh, wow.
He'd already done Barton Fink and Miller's Crossing, King of New York.
Slumming
Yeah,
it?
doing some bit parts. He was about to be in Hudsucker Proxy and Pulp Fiction and Airheads.
Wow.
So we're going to go through this one pretty quick. Basic
Yeah.
concept, a traveling salesman is staying at a shitty motel. People keep banging on the walls and screaming. Maybe a woman
They're
is
fighting.
being assaulted next door. He gets angry, is calling. The front desk won't help at all. He finally bangs on the door, says, "Shut up."
And then he uses a dictaphone to record his review of the hotel. Because there's no Yelp.
As he's going through everything he's spent money on to get reimbursed later, I guess, or whatever.
I guess.
He's going through how bad the hotel is. And then the woman next door who was yelling invites herself in.
After the whole fight has
Yes,
subsided.
the male assailant has left. She is vaguely attractive.
That's what they're implying?
She's supposed to be really hot.
Or at least interesting.
Right. Because she's just in a nightie and it's been raining.
Yeah, they're trying to act like she's Clara Delevingne or something, and where she's got like a mysterious, smoky look to her eyes. And you're like, oh, she's just this lady that I've seen in sitcoms.
Yeah. One thing leads to another. She seduces him, talking about how she's married to this guy who is on this farm. He's a real pig. And once we get him out of the way, I can have the rich farm of like $2 million or whatever it is. And if only there was someone there to share it with me. Steve Buscemi is like, okay, I'll bang you. And let's kill this guy.
Instantly. Totally, let's do
Oh,
this.
yeah.
Even though then after they hook up, she's like, but what about your wife? Well, I'm divorced. Well, then what's this wedding ring? Well, I'm going to be divorced. And then she's like, really? Well, I've thought about getting divorced. Well, in fact, I thought about it since you came into the room just now.
Yeah. Okay. There's something going on with this particular woman. Long story short.
Too late.
What? Oh, it's too late. So the husband breaks through, and you see that.
He literally breaks through the door.
Yeah, well, he breaks through the
and then
wall.
eventually the wall.
Yeah.
He opens the door and he grabs her around the throat, and then Steve Buscemi manages to push him out and close the door, and then he disappears again for a while.
Right.
The funny thing is, he's obviously a pig man.
What?
And he's legitimately a pig man. I mean, there's no subtlety to it. He's a dude with a pig's head and tusks.
Yeah.
He's a pig
Yeah,
man.
total pig man.
And Steve Buscemi's reaction is, man, I don't know how you married somebody so ugly.
Yeah.
Says, ironically, Steve Buscemi.
He's got that big scar on his face, and man, how did you choose that guy? He's got fucking tusks. I mean, so Pigman breaks through, tries to kill her. Buscemi stabs the guy with his cutlery that he was trying to sell.
Okay, in this part, seemed like you were really skipping over some plot points here. Oh, the cutlery I'm trying to sell, I'm stabbing the guy. That seems like an ironic twist. He only stabs him once, which doesn't really do anything. It just pisses him off. Then he turns around, back facing his wife, and his wife then suddenly starts doing some sort of magical incantation, like she's Kate Bush, but a witch. And then that's where he dies. But they don't really address that before or after.
Not really?
The stab in the back doesn't do anything. He turns around to go fight Steve Buscemi, and she, like, sticks her arm straight out like she's fucking Boris Karloff. And then he's like, and then he dies. Yeah, essentially, right. And then he dies. First of all, why didn't you do that from the beginning? And also, where the fuck did that come from?
Yeah.
Why is any of this happening?
Then Steve Buscemi is like, oh, he wasn't saying bitch. He was saying witch. You're a witch.
Something like bitch or bucho.
That's it. Bucho.
Biggest Mexican I've ever fucking seen.
How thick? So then, yes, you find out she's a witch and that she's put a spell on Steve Buscemi because he goes out. He's like, oh, okay, honey. He's under her spell. He goes out, comes back with some supplies, and you see that he's already turning into Pigman as well.
Mm-hmm. He's covered in mud, and she's like, well, you filthy boy, what did you get into? And he's like, well, there was a pool of muddy water outside, and I had this compulsion to go roll around in it. In the most obvious twist in the history of horror.
Yeah. As he's developing his snout and whatnot, I'm like...
He looks like a Tellarite from Star Trek.
Except not as good.
Except not as good.
Yeah, this episode sucked.
The thing we should point out is that they're laying in bed before he goes and gets whatever. She says something about like, well, do you still love me? And he's like, yes. In fact, the more I get, the more I want you, and I can't get enough of you. Leading into why they turn into pigs. Mm-hmm. But I mean, that line is actually the most important line in the whole episode, where like, because it doesn't matter. You see it all coming. It's really in your face. It's not even clever. It's just, hey, I saw Steve Buscemi in a thing.
Yeah.
That's cool.
It was cool to see Steve Buscemi. I don't think he was doing the best job here, but he also didn't have anything to work with.
Well, you know what? I'm not going to say he was phoning it in, because he does seem like he at least is delivering lines. Like, he's not rolling his eyes the whole time.
No, but it's also not his best work.
I guarantee you, he doesn't remember doing that.
The next episode we'll talk about the 6th episode from Season 3, viewing November 4th, 1990, The Hole. This one is directed by David Severid. Didn't really do much of anything else. But written by Haskell Barkin, who did lots of TV, like The Twilight Zone. But he ran the gamut. Darkwing Duck, to Jetsons, to Pound Puppies, to Fluffy Dogs. I don't know what that is.
So, obviously, a horror writer.
Jason the Wheeled Warriors, and something called Yogi's Space Race. Which, do you know what Yogi's Space Race is?
No, but if it's about Yogi Bear and the space race, I am so interested.
This is Yogi Bear and his friends enter a race to different galaxies in space, but must battle a variety of space creatures out there. They don't finish the race.
People don't realize how big a galaxy is, apparently.
I don't know. Yogi Bear has a Space Commander outfit on with a cape. It looks real weird.
Is there a space picnic basket?
No, but there seemed to be there's a treadmill that these dogs are running on to power.
A cosmic treadmill?
Yeah. It's real weird. We might have to check this one out at some point in time.
Yeah, we might have to revisit that.
It had 13 episodes back in 1978. Whatever.
Okay. Table that.
This particular episode is also based on a Wayne Berwick and Jerry Conway story.
Is that supposed to mean something to me?
Jerry Conway, and writer, a bunch of comic books.
Oh, okay.
Yeah, that's all.
Right. I was when you said that, I was thinking about Tim Conway again. Dwarf.
I have a dwarf band in my mind.
I have a dwarf tumor, apparently. And it actually is in the shape of Tim Conway as dwarf.
You might want to have that looked at.
Cancer, according to Dwarf.
But it stars Anton Pagan, Glenn Kubota, both guys who worked a lot in Hollywood, character actors you might have noticed, and Ahmad Rashad is your starring guy.
Oh boy! Ahmad fucking Rashad. If you don't know who Ahmad Rashad is, he later was, of course, the host of an NBC NBA basketball review show, one of those Saturday morning things where they would do human interest pieces about the NBA. Do you remember this?
Yeah, no, I watch it. I'm just letting you talk about Ahmad Rashad.
If I'm not mistaken, and you can correct me on this, Ahmad Rashad is one of the very few human beings who has both played in the NFL and NBA. And if I remember correctly, he hit one basket in the NBA.
Yeah, but I mean, what he's really known for is being a sports personality.
And being married to Felicia Rashad from The Cosby Show.
And O.J. Simpson was the best man at his wedding.
His best pals are Bill Cosby and O.J. Simpson.
Who walked Felicia down the aisle at their wedding.
Ooh! He jumps out of the crowd with the gloves on.
Yeah, he was an actor, producer on a lot of stuff. Did a couple movies, Space Jam and Best of the Best. Forgot about that one.
Was he in Best of the Best?
He was the commentator for the World Karate Championships.
Oh, okay.
Whatnot.
All right.
He was on TV for the NBA a lot.
He was a TV personality more than he was an actual athlete.
Yeah.
Like Bob Uecker.
Yeah, he fits. Whether he's talking about football or basketball or karate.
They used John Tesh's Fast Break as their theme song.
Yeah, like, he was on the NBA Inside Stuff for 16 seasons. So
his co-host was what, Sue Storm?
Summer Sanders?
Oh my god, I was thinking the Fantastic
I believe
Four.
he was Mr. Fantastic.
You actually let me say the name Sue Storm and didn't say anything about it.
Just let that
wow.
one slide on by.
When worlds collide.
That's fucking interesting, man. Lots of ins, lots of outs, a lot of what have yous. But all of that aside, he does play the main character in this Vietnam set war horror story as he and an American soldier and I guess a former Viet Cong soldier?
I guess.
It's hard to tell.
An older man, yeah.
They go into this hole that I guess was dug out by the Viet Cong.
Well, the beginning of the episode, you have I guess they call it an in-device shot where you're literally peering up from the hole that he drops a grenade into and seems to delight in. And then they set up this thing where the guy that he's talking to is like, you have to be crazy to sign up for multiple tours in Vietnam. So obviously he's the exposition idiot. And then
For the minimal story that we have here.
That's why those are important, because it's so little a story.
So they drop down, and there doesn't seem to be any Viet Cong anywhere. They're all gone. They find one guy who looks to be all torn up on his deathbed, and he talks about how the Viet Cong dug too deep and released an ancient darkness, and that they were coming for them.
Wouldn't that have been more interesting if it was the Americans that had done that?
Yeah, I felt like it was missing the commentary that I wanted.
100%. And I think that's actually part and parcel of this entire show. They kind of play it safe. They kind of take the easy scares, the easy jokes, the easy way out, because that is an interesting story if it were the Americans that had done that. If it's the Viet Cong, you're like, well, then why are we looking at it from an American perspective? Like,
we don't need the Americans for this.
No, not at all. What role do they play? I mean, like, if they're the villains, great, but they are, but also that has nothing to do with the supernatural plot, which is kind of the point of the whole episode.
Yeah, 2 ships passing the night, really.
Anyway.
So they're like, oh, what happened? Where are the things? And then creatures start coming out of the walls, trying to pull them in. Why did the Vietnamese guy die right away?
Yeah, that was weird.
I don't know if they're trying to say anything with this particular episode.
Well, I mean, they obviously are because of the obviously subject matter. I mean, if you're going to make a Vietnam episode and the cursed ghosts of dead from the war come to haunt you, you're saying something, right? You're not just, it's not random, but then what are they saying?
I don't know. I mean, that's what you watch this episode for, is for them to say something, and then
Yeah.
Yeah, this one really isn't saying anything. It just gives a vehicle for soldier spirits to kill these soldiers underground.
All of the elements of an interesting horror movie are there. I mean, there's a lot of really cool, like, descent as above, so below going on here, but it doesn't mean anything.
Eventually, the other 2 soldiers, they die, and Ahmad Rashad's the last one left, and he's trying to escape. He finally finds a way to crawl up, and he finds himself back in the same underground hole because it's the endless cycle of war or something.
I guess, or whatever.
Yeah, it was fine. It was a good setup for an episode, but
it really was.
I think some of the creature makeup was solid.
I thought that was really good, actually. Really well done.
Yeah, it couldn't be married to the best written story, unfortunately.
Sometimes they go somewhere and sometimes they really, really don't.
Yeah, like an interesting premise with this one. I remember this when I was a kid. So like once I watched this, I was like, oh, I remember this episode. This was the 10th episode of the 3rd season. This is called The Waiting Game.
Yeah.
Basic idea is you're in a nuclear silo. All of a sudden, these 2 guys who are in the silo together, they get the call. They got to launch the nukes. They're like hesitating. Oh, should we do it? Should we not? Is this really what's happening? They do launch the nukes. We pick up days later. World War III happened. The world outside is gone, an irradiated crater. Mm-hmm. Is there anybody out there? They actually get a hold of another nuclear silo, talking back and forth. But then someone is outside that silo, beckoning them out. So The one guy who's at the other silo, he leaves, and then the other woman who's at that other silo goes out, and that was kind of like their one contact they had. Then that woman shows up outside this silo, and there was a relationship between her and this lonely grunt who was working the control station. She convinces him to go outside, even though she shouldn't be alive. How are they there? He goes out. You find out that because of the irradiated darkness of nuclear winter, it has allowed the vampires to come out and taken over the world.
I Am Legend.
It's nuclear I Am Legend, and then that guy gets turned, and your last scene is the one guy left in the silo. You have to have these 2 codes to get in or out of the silo, a 2-man operation. And so the newly vampired soldier, he puts in his code, but the one guy still alive won't give his code. And so he's like, well, it's okay. I have all the time in the world. And you see him like 0001, 0002 as he just starts going through all the codes to finally get in. And so, he's going to die eventually.
There was time now.
Yeah. I mean, it's a very predictable kind of story. But for like a 20-minute surprise vampire tale, kind of creepy, voices outside that shouldn't be there, haunted by what had happened, it's okay. It's an okay episode.
Sure. The highest mark we've given this show so far.
Yeah. Again, we're dealing with monsters to show. There's a reason that everybody knows what Twilight Zone is, but only people of a certain generation who happen to watch this as a kid probably remember monsters.
Yeah, it's a very specific demographic that actually remembers it. It's probably even smaller a demographic than remembers Tales from the Dark Side. Unfortunately, nobody remembers Night Gallery, which is the best in that genre, I think. But Monsters is a fun one. It's fun. It's nostalgic for you and I. And while looking back on it now, it kind of sucks. But
yeah,
but it's fun to see a lot of the guest stars.
Yeah. Which I think perfectly is encapsulated by this next and final episode we will discuss.
Yes.
This is episode 8 of the 3rd season, back from November 1990, called Shave and a Haircut, 2 Bites.
Yeah.
This is directed by John Stryzik. He did a lot of Tales from the Dark Side episodes and like the Land of the Lost reboot. Oof. Written by Dan Simons, who really didn't write much. Strangely, again, he wrote the book that the first season of The Terror was based on.
Really?
Yes. I don't know.
Okay.
Yeah. How random is that?
I'd say quality-wise, head and shoulders above everything you've mentioned, but...
So this is a story starring Will Wheaton and Matt LeBlanc.
Well, at this point, Will Wheaton had already been in Star Trek, but Matt LeBlanc...
Yeah, this is pre-Joey.
He was a nobody.
So Will Wheaton is obviously a kid here. He's in high school, and he is doing his best David Foster Wallace meets the Frog Brothers from The Lost Boys.
Okay.
He's wearing this bandana and has on like this hippie tie-dye shirt, but he's like a super well-educated, well-spoken guy going deep dive into vampires, and he's staked out across the street where there is a barbershop, and he believes that inside the barbershop there are vampires, and these vampires run the barbershop.
And why? Who knows?
Well, he kind of lays us out. All right, I've been watching them. They come in before the sun really comes out. They keep their blinds closed the whole time. They leave after dark. He puts together that it's like one of the last remaining guilds, and that barbershops used to be the place where you would both get a shave and a haircut, but you would also have surgeries done.
Which included bloodletting.
That's where you'd get leeches and whatnot.
Mm-hmm.
That's where the barbershop pole comes from. This actually dates back long, long ago.
In a galaxy far, far away.
To, I believe, the 12th century, where you'd have monks who would shave their head, and when they would do that, shave the top, you'd get a little nick a lot of times with the razor. And so then they would have towels they would put on the top of them to be the red and white, and that would show a symbol that they were pious. But as monks became the educated level, they would be the ones who would perform surgeries and bloodletting. That then was adopted by the barbers. So you'd have barbers who would have the red, and then surgeons who would have the blue on their pole. And then you'd have the combined, where red and blue on the barbershop pole. Eventually in 1740s, France was the first one to say, we need to stop this. Barbershops will do barbershop stuff and surgeons will do surgeon stuff. Like a decade later, that was followed by England.
And then comedy was born with the movie Barbershop.
Exactly. This is where it all leads. Will Wheaton's supposition is that around the time real vampires faded into the recesses of the shadows, that's when the barbershop guild became a thing, because vampires were the ones who got into the business, and it was a place where they could not only get blood easily, but were paid to get blood.
Premise-wise, this is already way better than most.
Yeah, this is at least a fascinating idea, some actual thought behind it, an interesting concept. So Will Wheaton wants to prove this. So they go after the barbers had left for the night. They sneak in. They find a razor that's 400 years old and has Latin inscriptions on it. And Matt LeBlanc doesn't believe this. He's just kind of going along. He's like, hey, we should get out of here. And then he goes to sit down in a chair, and all of a sudden this contraption snaps around his neck. If you were cut, that'd be where the blood would pool and go in.
Now we get into Sweeney Todd
Very
territory.
much so. So they're trying to figure this out, and then the doorknob jingles. And so they both go into hiding. LeBlanc goes into this doorway that shouldn't be there because there's no doorway out the back, but there's this door that seems to go downstairs. And so he's kind of like watching as the barbers come in, and the barbers quickly find Will Wheaton, and he tries to make up cover stories. And then finally he's like, all right, you guys are vampires. Now I'm going to prove it. Well, why do you think we're vampires? And he's like, well, I've seen this, this, and this. Well, if we're vampires, what about crosses? I love crosses. I went to the church just yesterday. Or, look at our reflections and
yada, 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 interview with the vampires.
Right, they keep proving they aren't vampires. And Will's like, well, I still think you're vampires. Well, we're going to show you what we really are. And they strap him down, and then they slit his throat. It's actually pretty cool. You see the blood like pumping out of his neck.
It's actually a good effect.
It really is. And while this is happening, Matt LeBlanc is like, oh no. He kind of gets scared, and then he goes down the stairs, and then he sees this room, and it's lit by candles. And he walks in.
Hot.
Oh, yeah. He walks in, and then you see this dais, and there's a tube that comes up from the ceiling, and all these bottles of blood, and this tube flows into the mouth of this mutated slug-like thing. Looks very much like the guild members in David Lynch's Dune. And he's slurping on the blood that's coming from Will Wheaton. And as he's, LeBlanc's like, oh, what is this? Oh, this is gross. And that's when one of the barbers comes down and he explains it. Your friend had an idea, but he was wrong. But I'm going to tell you the truth. Yes, vampires are involved with barbers, but not how he thinks. They realized that they couldn't be out in the world anymore. And so they found barbershops as a front. And as they stayed out of the shadows and just consumed over the hundreds of years, they have mutated into their true form, no longer needing to be amongst humans.
They're giant leeches.
By providing blood to them, they give us another resource, and you see like this slug thing spew out this blood substance.
The spice melange, yes.
Oh, man. It would be kind of cool if he did get tripped, because they feed it to LeBlanc, and all of a sudden the lights go on. He's like, oh, okay. In this trance-like state of recognition.
Mm-hmm.
They call it the Master, and they provide blood for the Master, and the Master provides blood for us. And it doesn't allow us to live hundreds of years, but it does allow us to prolong our lives and our vitality for longer than normal. And the story device from the beginning and the end is Matt LeBlanc comes in as an adult and was like, hey, my friend used to believe barbershops were full of vampires, as he's getting a haircut and a shave. And then you see at the end that LeBlanc has become a barber, as has Will Wheaton, as they have consumed the blood and are providing blood to the Master, allowing the few chosen ones to consume his blood, part of the sacred pact, and allow them to have power and wealth and influence and longer life in the shadows.
If I remember correctly, and this is just from memory from essentially when this episode came out, doesn't Will Wheaton, he goes in, he has like a mustache now, and he's like older,
LeBlanc has a mustache, and then as you see who is shaving LeBlanc, who then takes the chair, it's Will Wheaton, and he has a mustache. It's just like the two former barbers that they had encountered before, who both had mustaches and had this weird formality to them. And you, Mr. Verratti, and yes, I believe also Mr. Douglas kind of thing.
Hey, Ralph. Hey, Carl. Yeah.
But yeah, they become the new barbers, and they are the reason that there's always that old barbershop that shouldn't be viable, and that nobody goes to, and the prices haven't changed in, decades, but yet still seems to be in business. They're all fronts for giant slug vampire monsters.
Right. I mean, it's essentially Midnight Meat Train.
Yeah. Or if you have the weird vacuum repair place that only services vacuums from like the 1960s, but it's just a front where they can launder money.
Oh. I was thinking it was the movie Once, but yeah, I mean, yeah, that's probably.
Yes. The Hoover man, he's going to...
Hoover sucker guy. Yes.
He's actually a vampire who sings. He has a beautiful voice.
An Irish vampire, yes! Now we're getting somewhere.
I'd watch this movie. Once Upon a Bite.
You're getting there. Okay, well, that's Monsters.
That's Monsters, yeah. And that's also the best episode. And this is the episode I think that we both remembered the most from our childhood.
Vividly, yes.
Yeah, they were just...
Even though I don't think I've seen it since 1989.
Yeah, you could still pick out elements and remember it because
Absolutely.
It was a very evocative episode.
Yes.
There's a certain kind of childlike wonder, I think, involved here. I think it's some of the same things that interest you about like a Lost Boys. It's going on the same path here. And it's actually a pretty interesting idea that's decently executed. Mm-hmm. Yeah.
Yeah. Unlike a lot of those, which are just kind of cop-outs, it seems like.
And most of it, it is a Monster of the Week cop-out with a twist of some sort that rarely executes.
I couldn't come up with anything, so... He's also an alien. And you're like, okay, great, whatever. I don't give a shit. Yeah, no, you're right. I mean, this one, honestly, it felt like it had lore. Yeah, it felt like it had a lot of thought behind it, even though it was very short and, cheesy. But yeah, this one felt like a hidden gem, honestly.
Yeah, and this is one of those reasons you watch a show like this. Every once in a while, you will find one of these.
Absolutely.
Yeah. There's a few episodes that other people seem to hold in the same esteem that I haven't seen, so maybe check out more. And like I said, we dealt with 5 episodes of a 72-episode series, so there's plenty more. You've wasted Saturday afternoons much worse than checking out some monsters.
Doing worse. Like Blood Surf, for instance.
Yes.
We wasted a Saturday afternoon doing that one time.
Well, we were pretty hungover at the time.
And also, it was Blood Surf, so, I mean...
Forget about it, Skip. It's Blood Surf.
We're going to try and touch on as many of these as we can as we go along, and we want to make sure you understand how cool some of the obscure stuff is. And this is one of our jumping off points.
Exactly, yeah. It's stuff like this that allows for a Black Mirror to exist.
Absolutely.
Guillermo del Toro's Cabinet of Curiosities.
Right.
Those are the latest in a long line of horror sci-fi anthologies.
How many times have they rebooted Twilight Zone to kind of suck? So we're going to try to do some more of these. We're going to explain TV shows and films that maybe you haven't seen. We've seen, because that's who we are. So, word to the wise. Roku only has 1 episode of Monsters. Freevee, which is now owned by Amazon, only has 1 season of Monsters, but you can watch it all on YouTube.
Watch the YouTube.
Ride the snake. I mean, there's literally like 3 or 4 different sites on YouTube where you could just watch the entire series. And nobody seems to care, so I wouldn't worry about pirating issues or or trademark stuff or whatever. It's fine. It's totally fine. Everybody kind of like gave this up to the ether. So, okay, that's the first in our 80s, 90s, let's just say retro. How would you put this? Like retro, not retro rewind, because you've already established that as our cartoon thing, but we could still put it under that umbrella if you wanted to.
I mean, there's the cartoon crazies and the sci-fi sillies.
I mean, the Sunday scaries.
and Bullet in My Mouth.
We're going to do a lot of this kind of stuff because this is kind of the premise of our show a little bit. So we're going to try and touch on more stuff like this.
Stay tuned. You never know what we're going to bring to you
No,
next.
I hate you.
All right. No, I'm leaving the podcast.
Throws the table over.
I've had enough of this.
I drive a Dodge Stratus. I said good day, sir.
And I say good day to you, gentle listener. We'd like to thank you all for participating us on this monster quest as we took.
I don't know how you participate us, but I appreciate the effort.
We thank you. If you like this particular podcast, please leave us a review on iTunes or whatever podcatcher of your preference. Please like, share, subscribe. That would be super great for us. Let people that you think might like it know about it, because we'll keep coming out to you until we don't. So how about that?
We're going to be doing this either way, so we thought we'd at least record it for posterity.
Say the final lines.
Hit the button, Frank. Thank you, ladies and gentlemen, for tuning in. Please make sure you've paid your tabs. Make sure you've cleaned up after yourselves to some sort of reasonable degree. Please make sure that you have supported your local comic shops and retailers. And from Dispatch Ajax, we would like to say, Godspeed, fair wizards.
Mew, mew.
Please, go away.